Hi, my name is Samir Srivastava, and I'm a professor at the Haas School of Business at UC Berkeley. By now, it's pretty clear that we're living through an unprecedented time, with many businesses shuttered and many others having to lay off or furlough large swaths of their employee base. Many of you are appropriately focused right now on stabilizing your business, and that is entirely appropriate at the early stages of a crisis like this. But it's also becoming pretty clear that we are going to be in this for the long haul, that we're going to be living through a period of rather prolonged uncertainty and anxiety amongst employees. And the question that I want to turn to in our time together is how, during a period such as this, we can begin to build greater adaptability in the organization, to build adaptive capabilities during a time of tumultuous change. Now, this is something that, of course, you can only begin after you've completed some initial stabilization of the organization. And we really don't have a playbook for a global pandemic of this size and scale in the modern era. But what I want to offer to you are 5 practices that I think can be quite helpful in helping your organization develop the capacity to adapt and change to a very, very quickly shifting landscape. So I'm going to go through 5 of them, and I'm going to start with the idea of an overlay of nerve centers on top of your formal structure. When I say a nerve center, I'm not just talking about a kind of crisis response committee, which most organizations already have in place. There's some important differences between the nerve center, as I'm thinking about it, and a typical crisis response team. So one key difference is that the role of the nerve center is to really process information to make sure that the information that is being made available within the organization is accurate, has been appropriately vetted, is not false or misleading. Second is to make some recommendations to management. This is typically not a group that will be actually making all the choices, but they'll be proposing a bunch of courses of action to senior leaders and to operational leaders as well. And finally, this is a group that consists not just of the executive team, but a broad cross-section of the organization as a whole. And the way I think about these nerve centers is that they're overlays on the formal structure. So they're sort of transitional, temporary, cross-functional teams that bring together some of the best talent from across the organization. And part of their role is to try to integrate knowledge and insights from the external world with the internal world. So for example, what's the latest projection about the pace at which this pandemic is playing out and the economic consequences it's having both in general but also within the industry. And conversely, what's happening internally? What are the kinds of supply chain disruptions we're seeing or employee workplace disruptions we're seeing, and how do we put those pieces together? That's really the function of one of these nerve centers. And there are likely in most organizations to be a need for 3 to 5, maybe 7 such nerve centers, some more focused on customer engagement, some more focused on supply chain management, some more focused on employee issues, and also the need for some integrative cross-cutting nerve center that is actually thinking about the insights across each of those. So this is not meant to be in any way a substitute for what the management team and the organization itself is doing, but it's meant to be a very rapid process organizational entity that supplies the rest of the organization with accurate insights in a time when there's a lot of room and scope for misinformation to be spread. So what I've talked about in terms of nerve centers actually sets up the second point, which is that this is a time when it's useful to flex or loosen some of the existing structures and processes that exist in the organization, but at the same time to tighten the decision rights that operate in the company. So nerve centers are an example of flexing because they are this overlay. They kind of sit atop of the standard operating procedures that already exist, the work processes, and so on. But the risk with having nerve centers like this put in place is that the decision rights can very quickly get muddled, and you can very quickly end up with confusion and ambiguity about who should be doing what. So while these overlay structures get put in place, it's equally important alongside them being put in place to spell out who is going to be responsible for the critical decisions that need to get made in the organization. This can't be done comprehensively. It's simply not going to be possible to catalog every set of decision rights, but there are a set of mission-critical decision rights, and it's worth clarifying what roles people are playing in those decisions. It's particularly important to separate out so-called management rights, the rights to implement and initiate and begin new efforts and to make choices, from so-called control rights, which are the rights to oversee, overturn, and monitor how those decisions are getting made. Typically, one wants to push the management rights down to the people who have the best knowledge and expertise to make those decisions, and to retain the control rights with individuals and groups that can understand interdependencies amongst those decisions and the trade-offs that might exist. Nerve centers can play a very useful role in owning some of the control rights related to operational decisions, because again, they're more likely to be able to see potential unintended consequences of choices that might get made. So let me then turn to the third practice, and that has to do with all of the people in the organization who are either underutilized or even idled for periods of time. And we're seeing this in organization after organization. And one of the questions that's worth asking is, how can they be put to best use during a time like this? And one thing I want to commend to a lot of organizations is the idea of scenario planning and organizational simulation. So a lot of organizations are already engaging in scenario planning, thinking about worst case, best case scenarios about the pandemic, but I'm thinking about something that's even more specific to the organization. And what I mean by this idea of organizational simulation, the best analogy to it would be a military war game. So just as a military unit will prepare for battle by thinking through scenarios of what might happen, but then also how they would respond, who would play what role, how they would coordinate, how they would deal with losing a particular member of the team and having to fill in the roles. They kind of think through all the different ways in which they might need to respond. And in doing so, they not only get better practice so that when the real problem hits, they're better prepared to handle it. They have better insight about what to do, but they also build cohesion within the team and trust within the team. And in a very similar way, this is a really good time for organizations to be engaging in the same kind of simulation exercise. So this would entail first, thinking about the key uncertainties, both in the macro environment, the health environment, the economic environment, but also at the industry level. What are the new rules and regulations that might get put in place? Which competitors might not survive? And what are the consequences of that for your own organization? And then also within the organization. So what if the pandemic were to spread within clusters of your own organization, such that you had much less workforce availability for critical operations? What are the consequences of that? So step one is really thinking about the different scenarios. Step two is and the uncertainties. Step two is kind of putting those uncertainties together into coherent scenarios of what might happen. And then step three is thinking about the organizational response. So are there parts of the organization that would need to get further investment? Are there places you'd pull back? How might the structure need to change? How might roles need to shift? What new partnerships and alliances might need to be formed? Those are the kinds of things that one does in a simulation exercise. And there are lots of really talented people who are right now impeded from doing their regular work. They can be very profitably shifted to this, so that as this crisis unfolds, you as an organization have a better handle on how best to shift and adapt to changing circumstances. The fourth idea has to do with continuity planning. So many organizations have continuity plans or succession plans, but typically these are set at the level of either the executive team or a smaller number of truly high potential employees. This is a time to think about really expanding the continuity plans to encompass many people, if not all people in the organization. So having managers, local managers, think about if I were to lose this person for a period of time or even an extended period of time, how could I backfill? It's also a good time to think about ways to cross-train employees so that they're better able to fill in for other roles should that need arise. And this is another very useful thing that underutilized or even idle people can be put to work on is thinking about and fleshing out these continuity plans. So then let me turn to the fifth and final idea, which has to do with culture. And in a world where people have been forced to move to remote work, teams are interacting through online platforms, not face-to-face. There are fewer opportunities for social gatherings in the organization. It's very easy for the culture of the organization to begin to fray. And this is an important time to try to fortify the existing culture. But it's also worth noting that the world we're headed to in the future is not going to be the, quote, normal that it was right before the pandemic hit. We're headed for a very new reality. And we can't yet predict exactly what that reality will be. And so it's very likely that the culture we have in our organization will also need to adapt and evolve to embrace this new reality. And so we want to think about both fortifying the existing culture, but also allowing for encouraging and enabling some cultural innovation. And there are, of course, a whole host of mechanisms by which one can reinforce and build new culture, everything from the ways you communicate, rewards, performance management, the people you select or bring in insofar as you're able to do so at this time. But I want to end by talking about one particularly important practice, which is the role of narratives, of stories. And this is a time when everyone has a story to tell. No one individual and no organization has escaped the impact of this crisis, and it's playing out through a whole host of stories. So it's a very useful thing right at this stage to encourage people to share their stories, and for leaders in the organization to begin to curate some of those stories and to find those stories that are, on one hand, exemplify the core values that you really want to have endure even after this crisis ends, right? And they are stories that affirm some of the values you have around supporting one another, around inclusion, around teamwork, around excellence. All of those stories are worth preserving and disseminating, sharing more broadly, because they help create connection. Stories are a way to help people find meaning in a time when they are perhaps feeling some despair. But the other form of story is, as people are responding to changing circumstances, there are going to be new values, new beliefs, new ideas that get generated. And capturing some of those and finding ones of those that we think might be helpful for the future world, and also making them part of the shared set of narratives that employees have and that they can reference as they interact with each other, is a way of adapting the culture to changing circumstances. So I want to stop with those 5 points, and I want to end by noting that, as difficult as a period this is, I'm also feeling a lot of optimism about our individual capacity, but also organizations' capacity to evolve and adapt and strengthen ourselves during this period of time. So I wish you and everyone in your organization and your loved ones good health and happiness during this challenging time. Thank you very much.